everyone, and welcome to our fourth webinar already. In this webinar, we will tell you everything about all the trends and developments of the US remanufacturing industry. Rajiv is the founder of Recreate India Research Foundation and our moderator again for today. Rajiv, I would like to give the floor to you, please.
Great, thank you, Kim. I still see folks are filtering in to the room, so welcome everybody. It's wonderful to have you join us today. I'm very pleased to share, just in terms of the representation and interest that we've got on this webinar. The last statistic that Kim shared with me was that we have 32 countries represented in the registrants, and we have about 184 registrants for this webinar. So it's really exciting to see so much interest as well as enthusiasm from the community in joining us and hearing about what's happening with the US remanufacturing industry. Before we get started, I just want to quickly go over a couple of points over in terms of the flow of the webinar for today. In the first 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to do very quick introductions, and then John is going to do a little bit of frame setting for us. After that, we have about 40 to 45 minutes for a panel discussion, and although we're calling it a panel discussion, it's really more of a group fireside chat. This is an opportunity to really kind of engage in a conversation in real time, and you certainly have the opportunity to ask your questions both through the webinar, and certainly at the end of the webinar, the last 10 minutes will be dedicated to answering Q&A. The four themes that we're covering in this particular conversation are how the remanufacturing industry is perceived in general around the world, how our panelist companies are working on sustainability in their own unique way in their respective organizations, the role of technology and technology development, especially as we're seeing in particular in the automotive industry, this transition happening from internal combustion engines towards greater electrification, and how that impacts and how workforce development can impact all of these sort of exciting opportunities that are down the road in terms of the evolving landscape. So we look forward to your questions as we're going through, and Kim will be consolidating those for me and sharing them with me, and I'll do my best to weave them into the conversation, and if not, we'll try to get to as many of them at the end in the last 10 minutes or so. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome our speakers today, and please join me also in welcoming Jeff Stukenborg, who's the head of product engineering for remanufacturing at ZF Group. Welcome, Jeff. Also joining us is Sean Zwicker, Global Recon General Manager at Cummins. Welcome, Sean. PT Muldoon, Director of Engineering at CRP Industries. Welcome, PT. And last but not least, John Chalifu, who's the CEO of MEMA Aftermarket Suppliers and the Chief Sustainability Officer at MEMA. Welcome, John. I have to say that John has been the glue that brought this group together, and he's been a terrific partner in thinking through the themes that we're covering in this webinar, and has really been a great support as we've pieced this together and made sense of it. So it's a cogent and useful conversation for you to listen to. So with that, John, I'm gonna pass it over to you to get us going and set the context for our conversation.
Well, thanks, Rajiv. And I can tell you it's great to be here with you and our distinguished guests. And I've had the opportunity to work with each of them, and you really picked a great bunch. So with that, I'm just going to help to lay the framework for today. And as you mentioned, Rajiv, we will be discussing the state of the remanufacturing industry from the perspective of executives that live and work in the United States. We'll focus on 4 key topics: marketing, technology, workforce, and sustainability. And I thought I'd take a moment in setting the stage, especially for anyone who may be new to the topic of remanufacturing. Maybe you're tuning in because you're looking to attend your first REMATEC show this year, or maybe you're intrigued by the quality, value, and green aspects associated with remanufactured goods. Quite simply, remanufacturing is manufacturing. It is manufacturing with reuse. And given that it's a higher form of manufacturing, remanufacturing is also referred to as responsible manufacturing or sustainable manufacturing. And that's because the process starts with original products that were previously sold or are worn or non-functional. And those goods are returned to the marketplace where they can meet the needs of society. The remanufacturing process gives goods a second life, and it has all the rigor of the manufacturing process. Whereas whether it's a car or truck part, or your mobile phone or computer, when the remanufacturing process is complete, the finished good performs like new. We will spend time today talking about the marketing of remanufactured goods. How can we help the perception catch up with reality? Jeff is the leader of RIC, another remanufacturing group in the US, and he will share how the advent of Reman Day, celebrated each year in April, has done so much good to get the word out. We will touch on the current and coming technologies that will help remanufacturing to stay at the forefront. In automotive, our industry continues to move to connected and electrified vehicles. As the parts on board become more complex, remanufacturing will lead the way in delivering high quality and affordable service solutions. Sean has some great experience with additive manufacturing and will share how further advances, particularly on the cost side, can help remanufacturing to advance. We will discuss the art and science of remanufacturing and how our unique industry has a bright future for all in the workforce. Whether experienced, right out of school or trade school, or even younger, PT will share his experiences and how he gets great reward from just being himself and motivating the next generation of workers. And we all know that sustainability and ESG are everywhere. Yes, we will cover the topic and discuss how remanufacturing, which is sustainable by definition, should be included in any discussion on circularity and how it should always be considered before traditional recycling. Rajiv has done some extensive thinking and work in this area that will help to lead that discussion. The examples I've just given are to help set the stage. Throughout the next hour, each of our panelists is invited to contribute on all of the topics. And with that, I look forward to a great discussion and pass the mic back to you, Rajiv.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, John. Great. So thank you for also mentioning some of the areas that our panelists have been working on. I just want to kind of pull at that thread a little bit and jump right in. And just for context, for the folks joining us, each of us have had conversations in the background, before getting to this webinar, just to talk about experiences and the stories that really we want to use to weave this whole conversation together. And when Jeff, John and I connected a couple of weeks ago, Jeff mentioned something really interesting in terms of how the work that they're doing at ZF, especially in terms of positioning remanufacturing as part of the broader sustainability conversation through their marketing content and newsletters, has really kind of picked up. So Jeff, it'd be lovely to hear about that experience and how you're seeing this growing interest coming through the newsletters that you're putting out and how folks are responding to the work you're doing in remanufacturing and sustainability.
Yeah, thanks, Rajiv. I'm excited to talk about kind of an example of what we've been doing here at ZF. I've been, as the chair of the Reman Industries Council, every year in April, we host, we're the host organization for what we call Reman Day. And the purpose is really an educational event. I come from the WEBCO organization. We were acquired a couple of years ago from the ZF group, and it looked like a great opportunity for me to use Reman Day to help kind of leverage who I am and try to get to know our other people in the Reman industries at the ZF group in our different locations. Last year, I decided, what really makes sense is really take the sustainability angle of this and get to know my sustainability team at ZF. I've seen these people posting on our internal company network, and I'm like, I'm going to invite them to our Reman Day. So we did that. We actually have them participate in our global internal call. So we had all of our 15 remanufacturing locations, as well as about 25 people from our sustainability team participate. And it was really an excellent way to get to know them. I was able to tell them what reman was about. They, in most cases, didn't really know. And it made a nice internal event. So as an external communication, though, then we decided, for the same thing, was talk about the environmental benefits of reman, how it participates in the circular economy, and we sent out some external communication on that. And what I found out is that all of the external communications that our company did last year, this posted number 3. So that was impressive. I think the reality is that people are super interested in sustainability, circular economy, and then now I'm bringing in what is reman as a solution to both of those.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it's wonderful to see that, right? It's sort of the convergence that's happening in terms of remanufacturing, not just being out there by itself, but as a sort of in the broader picture of our aspiration towards the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the integration into the circular economy conversation. On that note of sustainability, and I want to dwell on this a little bit more because you guys have been doing this for such a long time. And when we talked earlier, really, the essence of remanufacturing from the standpoint of the sustainability benefits have been there long before sustainability got packaged and became more sort of mainstream as part of the conversation. But PT and Sean, it would be lovely to hear from your vantage point and in your respective companies, what that movement has looked like in terms of establishment of a sustainability vision, goals, and how you're seeing sort of that movement occurring within your organizations as well as broadly within the industry. So PT, if we could start with you, that'd be great.
Yeah, so you know a little of my background in terms of, I ran Mopar, so one of the largest remanufacturing operations in the world for a lot of years, and that's where I kind of built my base. Now I'm with CRP. Now I'm with a company that's a $100 million a year company, not the 800-pound gorilla, probably sized like a lot of the companies that are on this call that are looking to see. What we've done is we've redesigned our system as a company to diversify, to move into what we call ethical manufacturing, which is, we know as we move from ICE into more electrification, more complex electronics, more complex mechatronics, that our stability as a company is going to be tied directly to our ability to compete in this new world of circular economy. And the way that we're going to drive that as a company is the way that we did it. At the very start of COVID, we opened this office in Ann Arbor. I'm literally 2 blocks from the University of Michigan. Sit on, Wayne State's board, sit on Eastern Michigan's board, working on doing more with the University of Michigan and with Purdue also. So we're looking as a company to understand that the next wave of this is going to be not necessarily recycling, but ethical manufacturing, remanufacturing, where, there are 60, 70, 80% usable goods still remaining in the core that's coming back. And so it's really been almost a shift in our policy as a company to invest. We invested heavily. We opened an office. We put engineering in here. We're interfacing with, even the folks on this call. We're interfacing with a lot of what we would have used to call our competitors, and now we call them our neighbors, because in order to take this hill together as companies, we've got to change our mindset. And you'll see more of that. Sean, I'll step out of the way and let you have a turn, but you guys are doing a lot more design for remanufacturing, specifically up front, to understand this stuff. So I think it's a shift in terms of what we're doing is the right thing. We've got to draw that talent, and we've got to put that focus back into our companies to say, look, there's going to be a metric going forward that asks companies if they're tier 1, they're tier 2, they're tier 3, all practice ethical remanufacturing, all practice very sustainable circular economy. And so that's where we see our role, was to build this research facility and then use that to interface and find new opportunities for the company. So Sean, sorry, didn't mean to.
No worries, PT. Thank you. First of all, thanks for having me here today. I'm super excited to join this group. It was very encouraging to hear that we had 32 countries represented here today. That's fantastic that there's a global presence interested in remanufacturing. PT talked about the connection between remanufacturing and sustainability. In my company, in Cummins, we do have a very major initiative called Planet 2050. which has three major pillars. One, communities are better because we are there, near zero environmental impact. Number two, doing our part to address climate change and air emissions. We're looking to have carbon neutrality and zero pollution in our facilities, and customers powered by carbon neutral propulsion. Number three, which probably has the most direct connection to remanufacturing, is using natural resources in the most sustainable way. Nothing wasted, use materials again, and reuse water and return clean. I think you'll hear a common thread here today that there's a tremendous amount of tailwinds for remanufacturing. I believe it's only going to grow. Many folks like myself that are in organizations that produce new parts and remanufactured parts, I believe will get tremendous pressure to increase the breadth and the depth of our remanufacturing portfolio. And we'll have to, remanufacture parts multiple times as internal combustion starts to wane in the future. The supply base may start to shrink. So we're probably going to need to start looking at, advanced core collection on the front end. We may need to look at our manufacturing techniques and say, hey, not only can we remanufacture these things once, but can we do it in a way that we can, figure out how to do this 3 and 4 times again to provide the most value for our customers and environmental sustainability. The last thing I would mention, PT kind of touched on it, but I think you'll see another big push for design for reman, right? That we're actually working with the first fit design engineers so that we render our products much more amenable to remanufacturing right from the beginning. So, that may mean some changes. Things may making them more repairable, I would say, but certainly if you have the right techniques and approaches, make themselves more amenable to remanufacturing and therefore help us from an environmental perspective.
Thanks, Sean. And did we by chance lose Rajiv on our feed?
I think we did for a moment.
Okay.
John, if you don't mind, I want to say something a little bit just off of what Sean was talking about. So,
Yeah,
if we're doing the same thing, I think what's important, as PT also mentioned, is the design for sustainability, getting it up front early in the design. And this year we're also to get to our climate neutrality goals in 2040 and some sub goals in 2030, we have to approach the design up front. And what we've done is inserted a design for sustainability, design for remanufacturing goals up into the initial design, like phase, our gate 0 right at the beginning, to try to influence it so that when new projects are coming through, they're looking at the carbon footprint of the project itself from the very beginning. And I think it's important because if you do things up front, you can really help yourself a lot in the tail end. And I think the challenge is always life cycle approach. How do we get to the life cycle and address that? But if we can do it early on, we can do it with very little impact on the cost of the product.
Rajiv, that leads me to think of conversations we've had about life cycle assessments and the negative externalities. And I know that's an area that you really like to discuss. Maybe if you just want to add something, that would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies. Let me just make sure that I had a brief kind of glitch.
With that, we're
so you guys can still hear
why
me
don't we
and see
do
me?
this? We'll go ahead. We have you now.
Hello. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm having a bit of a network issue.
I think what we'll do,
here.
Rajiv, if you'd like, I can to keep it going, or while your connection hopefully gets better. I just wanted to add really quickly to what you had said, Sean, and then we can move on possibly to the next topic. But I loved how you said communities are better because we are there. And we all know we've moved from this shareholder to stakeholder economy, and that's good. And what we do in PT, ethical manufacturing, responsible manufacturing, call it what you want, but as we said at the start, we're sustainable by definition. And what we're doing is we talk about reduction and how reduction is so important, even carbon reduction. But remanufacturing is a reduction of continuously making brand new product that ends up somewhere else. And that's what's so beautiful about it, is we are helping society by reusing parts that already exist. And with that, Rajiv, maybe it looks like you're back. I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks, John. You guys can hear me and see me okay now?
Now we
Yes.
can.
Great. Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you. My apologies. I'm not sure what happened there. It just kind of kicked me out, internet connection on my end. No, thanks for stepping in, John. I caught some of it, but I didn't catch all of it. So apologies if I repeat some of this, but I did catch your question on the life cycle thinking aspect of things and negative externalities. And
Yeah, just building on something that Jeff had said. And if you wanted to add something there and then maybe take us to our next topic, but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just very quickly, I think, this goes to some of the conversations we've had from the perspective of not just the way remanufactured products are perceived, but also how they're priced, right? And I think there's this issue from the perspective of life cycle costing isn't really the methodology that's used in the way products are priced. And if you were to account for the negative externalities, which is to say the negative impacts across the value chain, across the life cycle of products, it's easy to conceptualize that products that are designed with end of functional life in mind so that they can have multiple life cycles will arguably have lower life cycle costs, which are typically spread across a vast user base, not just the product user, but everybody within the value chain. And I've had many conversations with folks in this space, and obviously not extensive, but part of the challenge in terms of capturing that as a metric is the absence of good information. The data from the standpoint of how do you measure, quantify, and then monetize, turn it into a monetary value, what that cost is a bit challenging. But I would be willing to wager to some extent that the life cycle, from a life cycle costing perspective, it would be significantly lower. So thank you for allowing me to kind of share that, John. So I'll pause there. In the vein of life cycle thinking and sort of taking us into this space of technology and technology development, Sean, you mentioned something in one of our previous conversations, which is, from a remanufacturing perspective, it's extractive in process, which is to say, when you get cores back, you're having to machine them back down to some extent. But there is this opportunity from an additive manufacturing perspective to build the parts back up and then ensure that from a functionality, efficiency, quality perspective, you're able to retain that value for more than what would have been possible if it were simply sort of an extractive process. So it'd be great to kind of hear, maybe what some of the work Cummins is doing in that area, but also how that sort of unfolds from an opportunity landscape perspective.
Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit previously, but I believe many of us will be put into a position where we're needing to remanufacture things, not for one extended life, but perhaps 3 or 4. And so I think that's going to change the approach we take to remanufacturing. If we step back, a lot of what many of us have done is kind of machine shop type work, right? Very fancy, scaled up machining. I think that some of that's certainly going to be there for the long haul. But as we think about doing things multiple times over, you can only machine something down so much before it becomes unusable. So I believe we're going to have to kind of migrate to some kind of mixed technologies, maybe subtractive and additive at the same time, right? So that we can restore things back to original, not just functional usage, but also dimensional specifications, right? Same as new, and be able to do that with scale. The problem right now is kind of doing some of those things. They will work, but sometimes we don't have the scale to make them work. So in my brain. We need to kind of put the manufacturing into remanufacturing, right? And think about scale. How do we do many of these things with a tremendous amount of scale? And the other reason we need scale, quite frankly, is we're going to be needing to reduce our costs as well, right? Many of us are in industries where we produce new parts and reman parts in the same business. And from a business perspective, sometimes those things compete. The more we can do to lower the cost of reman, it helps us from a business perspective. And you already have the natural environmental benefits. So to me, there's a lot of momentum and maybe, some opportunities for collaboration as well. How do we think about these big capital bills, kind of amortize that in the smartest ways and, bring some new science to bear that I think is really kind of going to get us to the next level of yield, which we certainly want, and profitability as well.
And you mentioned the collaboration element of it. And I've been in this for a long time, right? 35 plus years. In the early years, we were just all competitors, and we would hide any process that we would discover from one another because it gave us competitive advantage. We're suddenly walking into a world where we're not only are we doing the right thing, but there's not enough of us. Okay, so suddenly we find ourselves in a unique position where we can help one another. We see it on, I chair the TOPS Council for MIRA. So it's a very participatory, and I encourage, other organizations to have similar type forums or to come participate with ours. So I don't see competitors anymore. I see collaborators. I see there's more than we can possibly all do individually. So somehow we've got to figure out how to leverage our expertise in different companies to help one another to be more successful, because the more successful we do a good job of ethically manufacturing, of remanufacturing to protect the planet and to protect the resources that we're all trying to do all over the world. The more we do that, the better our industry gets and the more competitive our industry gets. So the day will come when we can't share everything anymore, but I think for the next 10 or 15 years, we're gonna have to work together a lot to figure out how to do this very, very correctly. So we build people's confidence.
We have a scenario we're working on actually with Cummins, with Sean's organization. So we're leveraging some of their additive processes on a lower cost part. In the past, some of these additive processes are kind of been prohibitively expensive on lower cost parts. But because of the situation on trying to fulfill new replacement parts, because of logistics issues, supplier issues, things like that, there's even more pressure to salvage components. So we're things that we may have thrown away in the past because we thought it just prohibitively expensive. We're working on with Cummins on some additive processes on our products, and to see if we can increase salvageability and benefit both of us. So.
Yeah, we've reached out to them in a similar way because our organizations are fairly close. We're in Conway, South Carolina, and they're over in Charleston. So we're trying to figure out if we can bring any help, and if they can bring help our way. So I think it's more of a neighborhood approach. I think it's rising tides lift all boats, and I really think that we're starting to see that collaboration. That's why it really excited me to hear there's multiple countries on this call. There is an opportunity to work together to take the hill and to do an excellent job. And if we do that, there's going to be more products that we can remanufacture. It's going to continue to add into our industry collectively. So, and the skill set will raise up. So.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I just want to make a put a fine point on a couple of things that were mentioned, but John, both by you and PT. John, you mentioned calling it responsible manufacturing. PT, you've talked about it using the term or phrase ethical manufacturing. And I think these are, there's this broader push from the standpoint of the movement towards a circular architecture, which necessitates collaboration. But I think what I'm hearing, and I think what makes me so proud of being part of this conversation in this industry, is so many of the folks in this industry are driven by values. You mentioned just doing the right thing from the standpoint of this matters. We have a responsibility to be stewards of the resources that we're gifted with, and how do you, and then talking about efficiency and the creation of the system makes more sense. But I think sometimes I have found myself feeling a bit starved from the perspective of, it's all well and good to talk about about in terms of taxonomy concepts and engineering, but the human part of it, I think, which we all feel inspired by most in terms of doing the right thing and being part of a community that's trying to create a world that we all want to be part of and live in and be proud of. I think that's something that I wish we talked about more, and I'm really pleased that we're touching on that here in this conversation. So I just want to quickly
as a society, we're being driven to reuse as much as possible. Remanufacturers and the remanufacturing industry, we're doing that today. So,
yeah. Well,
hence
having
the
come from an
responsibility.
OE where a lot of times decision was made on cost alone, and it wasn't always the right decision for the planet per se, or the long term, it was more of a short term looking at margins. And we're all running businesses, I understand that. But I think what's coming next is that banks and lending institutions are going to start to look at how we behave ethically as companies, and there's going to be a scorecard. So I think there's going to be a premier put on, okay, do we really need to, these electronics in this control module are very caustic to pull out of the earth. Can't we reuse these instead of disposing of them? And, maybe it doesn't make the business case up front, but 5 years out, it's the right thing to do, and it helps that scorecard. So I think we're going to see more and more of that too.
If I could just jump in and add to PT's comment there, I certainly see that as well. We talked a little bit earlier about in the investment community. They are, my belief is, going to be putting more expectations on us. I talked about some manufacturing changes, but I think there's going to be some reporting changes as well, internal and external. I think the expectation for remanufacturers to report out in a very, very robust way to investors and customers will be coming, if it's not already here. We've kind of survived for a long time with, approximate is okay in terms of what we're doing with mass reduction, et cetera. But, if they're going to start making investment decisions on that, that's going to have to be, kind of auditable, very, very robust information. And, some of us are getting those types of questions already from our customers. So I think that's the other big thing we'll see is much more robust reporting systems.
From the qualitative to the quantitative. I mean, that's what we're moving to.
Well, and just to drive back the collaboration model, there's no one on this call that I haven't called personally. Jeff, I've called you. Sean, I've called you. Rajiv, I've called you and asked questions and gotten help. And I think I've given help too when we were asked. So if you're out there and you're a small company and you join this thing with a genuine desire to understand and be a part of this, if we can help in any way, pick up the phone. I will help you. I mean, we built this R&D center, and the other companies have done exactly the same thing. We built this to push and to rise everybody's effort to do a better job collectively as an industry. The business will come. We're already learning that. We've landed a number of excellent programs here, just based on setting up an R&D center and then helping people through solve puzzles, right? So if you're sitting there and you're a 10 or a 15 or a $20 million company just trying to get your legs, and we can help in any way or point you in the right direction, I know we will. This is a good group on this call, and everybody is really invested in their lives in remanufacturing and wants to help, the next ones that are coming up too. So.
Thanks, Pete. That's the perfect segue into a question that popped into the chat. One of our attendees asks, of the many countries that are being represented on this webinar, many of them, and the questioner is from Brazil, so many of them are from countries where remanufacturing is still emerging, it's still developing. And so the question really is, what tips would you give in 2023 to emerging countries who want to develop their remanufacturing industry? And there's a sort of 1.2 question, which is, should there be, should they follow the model of consolidation which has happened in the US market, or do you see other avenues in terms of the development of the industry based on your experience in the US? Anybody who wants to take that.
Can I jump in really quickly, Rajiv? And I just want to say, start here. Don't call core or core material used. It's previously sold, worn, or non-functional. The moment you call it used, other countries or people will look at it as possibly waste. Core material is not waste. It's an input to the remanufacturing process. So I'll just say, words matter, start with the mindset and look at it as it really is. We are reusing products and giving them a second life.
I think this sort of ties to the development of robust and sensible policy, whether it's in the form of rules and regulations or licensing, or even the establishment of standards, right? I mean, in other words, from the standpoint of what the taxonomy is, a lot of that tends to be dictated by the rules and legislation that get played out. So that might be also an important place to start, which is the formation of coalitions within your respective nations, and then doing the advocacy work from the standpoint of sensitization and awareness building within those who are in the policy bureaucracy.
Don't be afraid to invite experts who've already done some of this to participate, even if it's from a Zoom standpoint. You will find ready participants that will talk about positives and negatives. I've done a lot of work in Brazil. Part of my career. Step one is to get the story out in places in social media of what you're actually trying to do and why it's the right thing to do. Because if you can build that kind of coalition within your what I'll call your consumers of your country, it becomes a lot easier model. It becomes kind of a pull model, where you put out there, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to do, and this is why it's the right thing for our country, for our world, for our grandchildren. If you can tell that story as you're framing up the model that you're trying to do, you will find advocates you didn't even know existed that are eager to help and participate in that. So it makes for some really interesting alliances, in that groups that normally oppose manufacturing can be very helpful when they find out that it's ethical manufacturing, and that what you're trying to do is set the stage to pull less out of the earth and to reuse more of what you've already pulled. And so, Cummins is a cool model because you guys do your parts wherever you happen to sell, unless that model has changed drastically. So you end up, I call you guys the Green Berets. You go into a place and you teach them, you teach them how to do your product in their region, so you don't have to move giant equipment around, which is kind of cool. So, there's some folks on this call that could help a lot, and in the greater organizations. John Shelfo can point you to a lot of those folks.
I might add two things, Rajiv, that kind of popped into my mind to answer that question. One would be, work with your country's local remanufacturing associations, whatever they may be, to lobby legislation to allow warranty replacements. Very often kind of warranty replacements is consumers' very first experience with remanufactured parts, right? And when they find out it's good and reliable, then they become very much more accepting of that when it's time for them to make a purchasing choice, right? My understanding, by the way, in India, for the first time, that legislation has changed and they are allowing warranty replacement. So I think that will have a very big long-term effect. The second thing would be to put some of the onus back on the producers. I would say, to take away any doubts, consider offering a warranty with your product that is 100% the same as new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. I think one other thing I can talk about. So at WAPCO and ZF, we do some reman down in Brazil. We have the lower volumes and trying to put together business cases for putting in brand new full facilities. A few years ago, we were remanufacturing product. Of course, we built it new today, so we had the assembly, but we had to work through how we're going to do the disassembly, cleaning, and the whole salvaging part of the reman. We actually contacted a Cummins supplier that with our relationship with Cummins, and we're leveraging one of their suppliers that was doing the same thing for them. So we went to that supplier, we got them to it up quickly. We're able to do they do the disassembly cleaning side, and then they ship it to our new plant for full assembly. So then we can provide a reman, try and reduce our investment and still do it. So again, leveraging people we knew in the area, and I know Brazil has tons of opportunities, and we're looking at ways to economically do it.
Awesome.
All right. So one more point just popped into my head. We talked about legislation, but kind of free and open importation and exportation of finished goods and cores is probably a big thing to work on as well.
And that is a challenge in Brazil for sure. That is a problem.
And then one other point that pops into my head is, if you hear me talk, you're going to hear me talk about universities and trade schools, 100%. Okay. The key in emerging countries where the technology is emerging is to get buy-in at the university level, at the trade school level, because those folks may not all move into remanufacturing, but if they get exposed early enough, there will be the decision makers coming up in the future. And so that opportunity, whether they're interns or whether it's their first assignment to do a rotation in a remanufacturing environment, is really value add from a company standpoint and from a country standpoint to begin to engage the next generation of folks who are going to be the decision makers is paramount. The quality of people that we get involved, even if they don't stay involved, if they have some involvement at some point in their career, those folks end up being chief engineers and CEOs of companies and controllers, and then they start to ask questions of, is there a lower cost alternative? Do we not have to do an all-time buy? Can we do the right thing here? Can we design for remanufacturing? So I think the ball's kind of in our court, especially if you're in an emerging country, to go grab a local university, a local trade school, and engage them and start to get some of that raw material involved in what it is you're trying to do. I hear it all the time. Oh, the skill sets aren't there. That's not true. I'm not having any issue at all. We can get great people. We just have to explain what we're trying to do because we're doing the right thing.
And Rajiv, maybe just to potentially close the question from our listener in Brazil, but there's the Automotive Parts Remanufacturers National Association, and I would say get in contact with them. They're a party to an international industry definition or definitions on both the remanufacturing process and core.
Yep.
And I'll pass back to you.
The TOPS Council will help them.
Technology and operations.
There we go. Perfect. No, this is great. Thank you. And I think this applies broadly, right? Just in terms of creating the conditions, the enabling conditions for that ecosystem to take root and to move forward from the perspective of evolution of the industry, technology, workforce development. I mean, that's something that essentially is cyclical or an upward spiral, so to speak. And I think the more stakeholders that are involved, the better and potentially the quicker that uptake process might be, which I think is very exciting. And I guess applies not just to Brazil, but countries at large. And it's great to see that that's the model that's already worked and it continues to work on the US side. You made me think also, PT, there's in the engagement with the universities, there's also the applied research side of things, right? Which is in addition to the development of the skills that are needed, there's actually the work that needs to be done from the standpoint of, the recipe. So, for lack of a better word, or the process, how do we remanufacture more or design differently so that remanufacturing becomes easier, disassembly design for remanufacturability, which is something I think Jeff also mentioned earlier. And I think that becomes an important piece in that, to not undervalue the applied research side of things, to invest in that, and also to create a supporting environment where more of that can be done, because especially for smaller and medium-sized companies where they might not necessarily have the capacity to undertake that kind of rigorous research by themselves. Yeah. Great. Well, I want to, just a quick time check. We've got about 15 minutes to go. In the vein of technology, just going to stay there for a moment, and maybe we touched on this a little bit when I was briefly asleep at the wheel, but we're transitioning from this global transformation really that's happening, away from internal combustion engines towards electrification. And PT, you had mentioned early on, you're seeing, the mechatronics are changing and the electronics are coming to the picture more and more as well. From a vehicle's perspective, while the internal combustion engine might not be the dominant power system, the electric motors will be there, and then other vehicular systems like the braking systems, the steering systems will continue to be prevalent and more or less the same in some sense. So the question kind of there is, as opposed to looking at the landscape with despair, I mean, there's this kind of huge opportunity to rethink, vehicle design, modularity perhaps, but also to expand the suite or basket of what can be given multiple lives as we're doing this step change in terms of technology going from IC to electric or even hydrogen fuel vehicles. And I wondered if or anybody who wants to go to kind of talk a little bit of that and what you're seeing emerge in that transition landscape.
So what always existed in the marketplace was a backstop. So back when I was Chrysler, then FCA, then now it's Stellantis. There was always a backstop for me as an OE. In other words, there were companies in India and China, South America that would make parts to cover the market when warranty went past model, and we burned through the all-time buy. With IP that's out there today, that's gone. Okay, the reality is, in order to respect people's intellectual property, Reman is the one way to continue to service these parts post-model when it's no longer attractive to an OE. And we're going to see, from a technology standpoint, some rapid change, right? We're going to see, as we move away from ICE, you're going to see a vendor pool that changes every 2 or 3 years for a minute until this kind of gets figured out of who's going to be the technology providers. That's going to orphan a certain percentage of parts that have IP on it. You're not going to go knock off a headlight, because that headlight now has a computer on board that's sealed into the system, and it has an interface and it has sensors built into it. So, I mean, that's just picking one example, but Reman will be the solution to ethically respond to part shortages without interfering with somebody's intellectual property. And we have to be very careful that we respect those intellectual properties, because these OEs and these tier ones have spent a lot of money to develop them. So we have to play very fair and very, very ethically in order to do this stuff right. And I think that's the massive opportunity, is that there's going to be a move away from, what I'll call cloning parts. Remanufacturing is going to be the way to continue to service things and to respect people's property. So.
Yeah, I think PT on within ZF Group, I think COVID is surprised, though. Supply chain issues of COVID really provided a lot of pain to the new build side, right? And I think it even helped generate more and more interest in Reman, which has been great for us. That word all-time buy, that was like an evil word for me. I hate that. If there's a word that I hate the most in the English language, is that all-time buy, because it never puts you it's never a good situation generally.
Yeah.
I think Reman is the way to extend life, especially with electronics. We saw the issue with chips availability, and I think all electronics should be remanufactured. I think if you're trying to keep a product out there for 15 to 25 years after the OE production ends, building new is not the solution. The chips will not be there for that long a time. So Reman may be your only option, and I think it's the best way. And I think what's been great for our industry is all the stars aligning, whether it's sustainability, the interest in circular economy, but COVID put logistics issues on the map and put us in we had a whole nother solution there, so it's shame for us not to use the opportunity.
Yeah, I completely agree with PT and Jeff's comments, right? Probably well before we need to have all of our technologies lined up for battery electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. I think there will be this interim period between, what COVID taught us in terms of the international supply chain and some internal combustion volume starting to fall off. The suppliers some of them will start to fail. And if they are going to produce parts at all, they're probably going to want to satisfy first fit, right? So that's going to put more pressure / opportunity for us to expand our remanufacturing portfolio. Even if the parts are available, they're going to become much more costly, is my belief. And again, that just kind of puts the onus back on us that we're going to have to figure this out. And maybe what we've relied on for many, many years in terms of our typical core yield is probably going to have to increase dramatically, right? Maybe we've gotten by with, I don't pick some numbers, right? 50, 60, 70% core yield. I think we need to start figuring out how do we, get to 70, 80, 90, and what do we need to bring to bear to make that happen?
Awesome. Thank you.
And then be ethical how you do it. That's my other, I will hammer this point home anytime I have the opportunity to talk. We are judged collectively as an industry. There are shortcuts that you can take. They're not good shortcuts because they interfere with things that companies have invested money and they have ownership over. So respect. It has to be ethical manufacturing. It has to be, we have to do things the right way. We have to do things the correct way, so that long-term companies continue to invest in the technology without fear of somebody pirating what they've already done. And so I think that's integral also. There's always a temptation when you're first starting to cut a corner or two. Don't, especially not on the electronic side. You have more allies than you could possibly imagine. You just have to do it the right way. You have to be good, ethical citizens within this industry. So that's important too.
Awesome. Thank you. We've got a couple of more questions coming in, so I'm going to switch gears and try and get some of those up for you guys. First, just a quick shout out. The question on Brazil was by David Cataciner. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. So thank you for your question, David. And we have a comment and a question from Ramesh Subramaniam from UT Dallas, and he mentions PT, great point about the universities, involving universities and getting students more aware of reman at an early stage. And the question from Ramesh is, for whoever wants to answer, is on track and trace software applications such as blockchain, IoT for remanufacturing. And it's just a general question if there's any thoughts in this group, or if you're using it or thinking about using it as an application. Not yet, maybe soon, or maybe there's an opportunity for you, Ramesh.
Yeah, let me talk one part about, for me as an engineering guy. So maybe where blockchain maybe it'd help us out is, so when we're developing a brand new reman program, what we're always trying to do is figure out what's the usable life left in every component. And what we really don't know is what the part went through. And if there's a way that blockchain can lead to give us more indication of like where it went, where maybe the number, in case of braking systems, number of ABS cycles or things like that. But there's a way to understand maybe what part of the country it was, what part of the world it was. It might help us in salvaging, and because we can make decisions based on, if the part was in Phoenix, Arizona, most of its life versus up in Canada, it might actually impact how we salvage. And I think if there's a way that the blockchain can help us understand where the part's been, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And just to add to that very quickly, I was part of this sort of initial exploratory project by a company, and I'm not plugging them here. I just happen to be connected with this particular organization. And funnily, they're called Remade UK, because I know there's a Remade Institute in the US as well, but this is a private organization in the UK called Remade UK. And their focus was looking at the utilization of blockchain technology in creating sort of this online marketplace of sorts. And I'm not really sure where they are in terms of that particular rollout or their product development, but to answer, to give you some indication on your question, it might be worth exploring to see what Remade UK is up to, because they were using blockchain technology as kind of in the back end. So
and follow it further up the wormhole. So where I look at blockchain is on the core side. We regularly run into core that's been scrapped and is gone, that would have made a heck of a lot of sense to have stayed in the universe and have a lot of value. So I'm going to build off of Sean's comment, which is earlier and earlier into the process, being able to pre-capture the things that we know have a usable life, and that we're going to get to. As supply chain gets more and more difficult, you deal with larger and larger players, like the LKQs of the world that make decisions based on a handheld of which direction parts go. So that is where I think blockchain is going to start to feed what I call the ethical manufacturing wing, which is to start to identify things that have value downstream. There's lots of companies out there trying to figure out a place into this marketplace, and some of their places may be core. It may be managing and evaluating core. So that's where I see the first breakthrough from university level, is studying what should never make it all the way to the smelters, whether it has proprietary chips in it or whether it has technology that has IP on it that can't be remachined without permission from whoever holds the patent or the trademark on different things. So yeah, I do see a value there. I just see it a little further up the food stream.
Great, thank you, PT. In terms of just staying within this space of the utility of data and information, across the value chain, as well as on the state of a particular part or core, one of the questions that's come in is from Antoine, and the question is around the measurement of CO2 reductions for a remanufactured part. Is there a standardized way of doing this and communicating that? Is that something that's prevalent in practice at the moment, or is this again one of those opportunity areas from the standpoint of not just getting that, assembling that data, but also plugging it into this overall story that we're trying to tell about what the value proposition of remanufacturing is and what benefits it provides from a life cycle perspective, especially in the vein of climate action. So it can be a yes, there is, or no, it isn't.
I think it's coming. I think it's going to come from your lenders. Honestly, I think before you get your operating loan, they're gonna want to plug it into that.
Yep.
When I was at Axletech with Raji El Kassouf, and Raji had developed some software to actually calculate that. It was pretty interesting. At that time, I think you're going to see more and more of that. But that was the best one I've seen so far. Was the one that he did. And the Axletech was doing very big, very heavy components. So there was a real interest on the military side of their business to be able to explain how much material they had avoided mines, and smelting and forging and all the things that were going into those big axles. So
going forward, life cycle assessments are going to be required, let's say, for so many products. And we as an industry have a great opportunity because we just know, in a sense, by default, that remanufactured goods are going to do quite well. So if you haven't started that practice, I'd say take a good look at it, quantify it, validate it, and then communicate to the rest of the world, basically. Let others know. Let them know the good that you're doing.
If I was a young guy right now starting out and looking for a business to stand up, it would be, I would do more testing of the core. I would be a core broker that could actually handheld test the core and could guarantee a certain percentage of that core was reusable, especially from a circuit board standpoint. And that's a different kind of test market, but that's a whole industry that's going to spring out of all this. So
I think Sean and Jeff were already interested.
Yeah,
Probably. Yeah, probably right.
Yeah.
No, I'm really surprised there aren't capital, and maybe there are some capital equity companies that aren't looking at, how do we stand up a more intelligent core supply and be able to leverage circular economy. I think when I talk about following up the food stream and at the university level, that's that holistic approach to remanufacturing. And it's not in one country, it's going to be worldwide. You start to get into, we're going to share more and more common platforms, especially as we move away from ICE into EV. It's the battery technology, the motor technology is going to be relatively similar once they get it all worked out. So it's in our best interest to understand what's out there and keep it from getting to a landfill or keep it from getting shredded up. There's nothing more exciting when you're working a big program like I did at Chrysler, and you got to go figure out a way to service components that are no longer there, and you find out somebody held onto that core. It's like Christmas, right? You find, oh God, it didn't make it all the way to the scrapyard. We have a chance. I think as an industry, we're going to see more and more of those kind of discussions, even from a government standpoint, to understand, hey, don't dispose of stuff that could potentially be very helpful to the planet. Let's figure out a way to get it back into the food stream.
You know, kind of along those same lines, when I think about this, some of this intelligence, I think, is around, we all talked about some shortages coming up between COVID and normal supplier problems. It could be, but getting really, really smart about anticipating those shortages is a big piece of analytics works for us. And then kind of how much do you decide to put into inventory and core is going to be a big business question that we're probably all going to face. But I think there's probably a separate work or business, maybe just doing all this core analytics, right? How do we start to anticipate problems 3 or 4 and 5 years in advance so that we set ourselves up that we can offer a solution, right?
Yeah, and if universities start having that kind of an expertise, if they look at core as a field of study from an engineering standpoint, those folks, you won't be able to hang on to them. People like us will be trying to hire them away from you their junior year and work them in so that they stay from an intern standpoint. So it doesn't exist out there today. I know it. There isn't a program to go learn how to be a core broker, to understand useful life. And there's going to be a university that decides that makes a lot of sense. I've been having these kind of talks with the 2 that I'm on the board with to say, look, this could be a really good field of study, and it's going to be there's going to be a lot of demand worldwide. So.
I mean, that's exciting. And I think we have like a good couple of more webinars right off of there, right, in terms of areas to explore. We're at the top of the hour. In fact, we're 1 minute over. I just want to quickly, building on what was shared, it certainly seems like this question about, tracking and tracing of cores, as they navigate our industrial and consumer ecosystem. I think that's going to be an important piece of the puzzle that needs to be solved for, especially in terms of having some sense of confidence and prediction on when they might fail and when and where they are available. I think that's a sort of big piece of the puzzle. And Jeff, when we had talked, you had mentioned just in passing this idea of an industrial equivalent of a nutrition label, right? Which is to say, what are the impacts, the climate impacts, the material impacts, the weight, et cetera, and that sort of ties in a little bit to the question about well, how do you know what the CO2 offsets are? And I think as we're seeing, I think the interest in the consumer base, in general, has always been there to make ethical and responsible choices, but it's the absence of that comparative information to say, well, how do I know, right? Is this really better, and is this just while I use it, or is this across the life cycle? I think therein also lies this huge opportunity. I know some years ago there had been an attempt to do it for some products in terms of putting together the sort of label, but said, well, here's the environmental impacts across these categories. And I don't know if I don't recall it really took off, but I think there's something there that's certainly worth exploring from the standpoint of just making more sense of what your particular purchasing choice does from an impact perspective. I think we all care about that. So we are, this has been great. I think we have some ideas now in terms of, potentially more conversations that we can have and unpack some of the areas that were uncovered in this conversation. So again, I want to thank all our panelists, John, PT, Jeff, and Sean, for joining us, for giving of your time, and also in having a conversation that had so much candor and heart in it.